As Sumit has indicated, I'm here representing the Minister for Industry, Ian Macfarlane. So whilst I will be touching on some of the findings of the Productivity Commission's report, I will be taking a broader view as well and covering some of the things that the Minister has specifically asked me to speak to you about. As Sumit indicated, I've actually had a very long interest in the building and construction industries, firstly in my role as an engineer. So I'm a mechanical engineer, and can I say that politics would be a much better place with more engineers in it, and I'm definitely trying to encourage that. But secondly, it's through my work in industrial relations, and I was an industrial advocate in the metals engineering and construction industries for quite a number of years before moving into politics. And I still maintained my engineering interests in politics because I chair the Public Works Committee and have just recently returned from Indonesia and Thailand, where I was having a look at two embassies that we're currently building overseas, one in Jakarta and one in Bangkok. And as chair of the Public Works Committee, one of the things that I and my committee are very keen to do is look at what the costs are to government of building the facilities, the major public works that we have in Australia. And I should say that the Public Works Committee focuses primarily on building facilities for defence, for immigration, our embassies overseas as well. We don't look at road infrastructure at all, unfortunately, but I will try and remedy that at some stage into the future. Now, I'm certainly aware that this particular event here has been on the calendar since about 2010, and it is a significant event for us here in Australia because it brings together so many people with so much experience here to talk about what is important to us in the building and construction industries here in Australia. It does, as you are aware, the construction industry certainly has a big impact on our economy. And just on that, I have some statistics here, some of which you may already be aware of. But in 2011-12, the industry's gross value add was $99.5 billion, or 6.9% of the Australian economy. And in the same year, more than 1 million people were employed by the industry, and that accounted for about 10% of all people employed in Australia. So construction is certainly a major contributor to our economy and our major employer. Looking ahead, the Australian government is investing a record $50 billion in world-class infrastructure, and we want to make sure that we get the best results for that and the best practices are put in place, particularly to encourage private sector investment and to deliver these projects over the next decade and well into the future. We as a government are also keen to build the reputation here in Australia as a hub of infrastructure excellence in the Southern Hemisphere, so not just in Australia alone. And so I am delighted to be speaking on behalf of the Minister at this conference today. As you're all well aware, and I'm sure you have discussed yesterday and will continue to discuss today, the Productivity Commission's Public Infrastructure Inquiry report has only recently been released. What it shows, without giving an overview of the report itself, it certainly shows that what we have to do is improve our financing, our governance and the delivery of new infrastructure in Australia so that we can produce our increase our productive capacity and our economic growth. It's also very clear that we need to be reducing the construction costs of our major infrastructure projects and to improve project selection and long-term planning. Now, many of the recommendations that are in that report relate specifically to state and territory governments, and we as the Commonwealth Government will be consulting with them over the coming months. We're also going to be seeking feedback from industry on how best to implement the reforms in that report and to ensure that we drive project costs down and we increase competition in the market. So the consultation with industry and state governments in particular is going to inform the Commonwealth Government's response to the report that will happen later this year. It is very important that you take the opportunity to let your association know what your views are, because it's only through the government being informed of industry feedback in particular that we can construct an appropriate response to the report. So now it is very timely for you to be speaking to your association and making sure that your views are very well known. I'm certainly aware that AMCA is going to be seeking a meeting with the Minister, with Minister McFarlane specifically to address the Productivity Commission's report, and I certainly encourage you to do that. So whilst I'm not going to give a commentary on the report, I specifically note the recommendation 12.5, which states, and I'll quote, "For complex infrastructure projects, government clients should provide concept designs using building information modelling to help lower bid costs and require tender designs to be submitted using BIM to reduce overall costs." And the report recommends that governments, in consultation with industry and other private sector procurers, should coordinate the establishment of common technical standards to ensure that the greatest benefits from the adoption of BIM are realised. Certainly the early work has already been done, and that's been driven by AMCA, and I know BIMMEP aims to publish a set of standards, I think it's later this year, or they're being published as we currently, thank you, to ensure that BIM design models are precise and accurate, practices are applied routinely and consistently, and the sharing of information follows a predictable workflow which provides all parties with confidence, which is what we most desperately need. And I certainly congratulate the association and BIM MEP. Now, I do need to cover off some of the things that Minister McFarlane specifically wants me to raise with you today. And I guess to put into context some of the discussions that you have had and that you will be having over the rest of today. As you're all very well aware, Australia is one of the world's best performing advanced economies. Our economic growth has been consistent over the last 23 years, which is almost unprecedented in modern economic history anyway. We're aware that international competition is fierce and it is only going to increase now that we are certainly well into working in the global economy. But our future prosperity certainly is dependent on our capacity to reform the economy, and that's what we are trying to do and will be proceeding to do over coming years with the government. To build an economic base that is diversified, flexible and dynamic, we as the Australian Government are developing the National Industry Investment and Competitiveness Agenda. That agenda will target Australia's strengths, create jobs and exploit our competitive advantages. And we're doing a number of things to actually assist businesses to access these opportunities, and I'll just run through some of those quickly now. We're developing the skills of the Australian workforce and enhancing workplace productivity. We're supporting science and innovation and promoting the growth of industries of the future. We're encouraging private sector investment. We're creating new jobs, and we're reducing the burden and costs of regulation on businesses, including their energy costs. So if I deal with that last point first, as many of you would be aware, there has been a campaign that we have mounted to reduce red tape, not just in the building and construction industry, but certainly across all industries that we have here in Australia. And Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry survey found that 73% of businesses felt compliance burdens had gone up in the past 2 years. So we are determined that we will remove those barriers as much as we possibly can. We have an agenda that is going to mean that we will be looking to save $1 billion every year through the reduction of red tape. We have already had one day where we have repealed redundant legislation and regulations that have added to the red tape burden. The first of those was held in March this year, but there will be others. Every year we'll be looking at setting aside 2 days of parliamentary sittings where we will do pretty much nothing but deal with reducing the red tape burden on our industries here in Australia. But we actually need your input to be able to do this properly. Many people talk to us and they say there's too much red tape, but what we actually need is the identification of what that red tape actually is, Because it's all well and good to say there's too much red tape and we need to get rid of it, but we actually need to hear from industry what that red tape is so that we can then go about reviewing it, looking at what changes need to be made to legislation and to regulations, and we can set about working for you, which I'm sure that you would agree is actually our job. We're here to represent and look after the interests of industry and the residents here in Australia. We have specifically targeted reforms to reduce regulation in housing and commercial building and construction. And in May of this year, the government, with the states and territories, agreed to make the 2015 National Construction Code and future editions freely available and online. Now, on the surface, that may well seem as if it is a minor change to many people, but the cost of the code is about $400, and having it available online will deliver between 17 million and 55 million in economic benefits per annum. So it is quite a significant change to be able to offer that online and effectively bring us into the 21st century, where accessing documents via electronic devices is certainly the norm. It's estimated that, just on that subject, that the number of building and plumbing practitioners across Australia with access to the code will likely rise from 12,000 to around 200,000 simply by making the code available online. So it is quite significant in terms of the economic benefit, but also the ability of people to access this, whereas they hadn't been able to access it before or chose not to for a range of reasons. We certainly appreciate the impact efficiency improvements can have on competitiveness in the construction industry, and certainly the Air Conditioning and Mechanical Contractors Association should be commended for championing the building information modelling, the BIM, through its BIM MEP initiative, and I congratulate you very much on the work that you're doing there. It's important, we believe, to encourage industry to adopt and progress the efficiencies that BIM can deliver. And in keeping with the government's deregulation agenda, we as a government don't seek to tell industry how it should operate. We don't seek to mandate specific technologies or processes. Rather, it is our view that industry should make its own commercial decisions on enabling technology. It's encouraging that industry is taking the lead in developing common national BIM protocols and guidelines. This ensures that BIM data can be consistently applied and continuously shared between all parties in a project. The effort of industry to drive and facilitate the adoption of BIM is a great example of industry working together to ensure the benefits of technology can be maximised. So we recognise the value of BIM as an enabling technology and support the adoption of such technologies facilitated by industry based on its clear commercial value. The last things that I'd actually like to touch on today deal with skilling the workforce that we have here at the moment. The government has embarked on a fairly intensive and extensive reform of vocational education and training, so the VET sector. Now that sector is actually quite critical to the future of the building and construction industry. The reform agenda that the government is currently undertaking is the first in a very long time that has looked specifically at all aspects of the VET sector. The Minister has organised for workshops to be held all around Australia. They've been held in every capital city, and they've also been held in many regional areas to look at what is needed to reform the VET sector so that we do have appropriately trained apprentices and trainees going into the future. We are aiming to roll out some changes as a result of that consultation in the coming months and years. But our emphasis is going to be on more effective use of taxpayers' funds so that subsidies work effectively alongside the fee-for-service market to deliver the quality training that we so desperately need. We are also, and we have announced the National Industry Skills Fund, which came out in the budget. It's a fund of about $476 million, which is specifically designed to assist Australian industry to access training and support services so that we can build the skilled workforce that we need into the future. The fund specifically targets the SMEs, including the micro businesses, and it's going to be a co-contribution system under which business and the government co-invest in the skills that we actually need for the future. There has been a discussion paper that's been developed to provide the stakeholders with an opportunity to submit feedback to the government, and that is available if you'd like to have a look at the website on business.gov.au. Again, I do encourage you to have a look at that and to provide your input through it. It's very easy to just take things on board because we're so focused on what we have to do on a daily basis. But this is really information that we need from you in the industry so that we can best represent your needs and interests into the future. The final part of the trade area that I'd like to talk to you about very, very briefly is the trade support loans, which I guess have had mixed media reports about it, but what we are trying to do is deal with the fact that whilst the take-up rate for apprentices has increased over recent years, the completion rate remains quite low. It's around about 50%, which varies, that's the national average, but it varies between states and territories and also varies between urban and rural areas as well too. A 50% completion rate, I think, by anyone's reckoning, is actually very poor. And we're doing a lot of work to try and identify the reason that apprentices don't complete, and there is no one simple answer. But one of the things that has been identified to us is the lack of money that apprentices actually have, particularly in the early years. So what we have come up with is a trade support loan program, which was heavily weighted towards the first year of an apprenticeship, which gives the apprentices the opportunity to borrow money to support them to buy tools that they may need, but also to support them in their day-to-day living and to give them every opportunity to move through and actually complete their apprenticeship whilst having a reasonable amount of money that they can access. The advantage to the loans is that if the apprentice completes their apprenticeship, there is a 20% rebate on the loan as well too. So it is an incentive at the end of it to reward those apprentices that actually go through to completion. And finally, what I can say is that I believe that government does have a crucial role to play in setting the national direction for economic growth, for coordinating whole of economy action to tackle issues that face our economy nationally. What government does is it sets the strategic direction for the Australian economy so that our industries can become self-sufficient and competitive. Industry associations are a vital part of this process to act as advocates both to government and to industry members to drive the local reforms that builds competitiveness and industry productivity. I again congratulate your association for the work that it has done here today. As I've said before, Your Industry Association is actively going to take up a response to the Productivity Commission's report. I encourage everyone in this room to make sure that their views are well known to the association so that when your representatives meet with Minister Macfarlane, they are well informed of what your views are and they are in a position to best advocate for you. It has been my pleasure to be here. It's not often that I get the opportunity to be with fellow engineers and other people from the building and construction industry, but I guess that you can always go back to your roots then as an engineer and be very comfortable in a room full of engineers, and I certainly am, and it's been a pleasure to be here. I wish you all the very best for your deliberations today. Thank you.